Hi, poets. I'm Liz Whiteacre, and I'm here to talk with you today about developing voice in your poetry. So, what is voice? Voice is made up of a lot of different components, and everybody has a unique voice and can develop different voices using these techniques. Um, it involves diction, and I've shared these definitions with you here. But that's when you make the decision to use a specific word, and the word you pick, you feel does a great job communicating to the people you're speaking with or to your audience on the page a particular emotion or maybe point of view with that choice. We also have tone, and that's just how the speaker in the poem or the character in a poem or story is feeling about something, right? Sometimes people just sound grumpy or they sound stressed out when they are responding to you. It might be very clipped, short sentences, punctuated, and that lets you know that maybe they aren't happy in that moment. Other times, maybe they're really excited about something and their language runs away and they talk so quickly, barely take a breath. Sometimes people smile when they say something, and all of those different facial expressions when we speak help affect the tone. So, a writer and poet need to think about the choices they're making with their words and the way they write their sentences on the page to try and help readers understand what that tone is. We also have syntax and rhythm. And when we think about that, we're considering not just the way we write sentences, but also the way we think about lines in poetry. An awesome part about verse or poetry is that we can kind of manipulate the words on the page to add pause, emphasis in ways that we don't when we're writing prose and we're just going from margin to margin. We're also thinking about how things sound when we put those words together, how they flow together. If we make unexpected choices, like take out punctuation or specifically create a run on sentence or put in an em dash, that's all going to affect our readers. The point of view of a poem, that comes down to your pronoun usage, right? Is it first person, I'm doing this, second person, hey, you're going to do this, or third person, which feels a little bit more observing, he, she, they did this. But you can also consider too sometimes the attitude. Are you looking at the situation from the point of view of a mother, right, versus a daughter, or the family's cat? Um, that's all hypothetical, of course, but that can also be a part of how you're making those choices and how you want to communicate with your audience. And then certainly, we've talked about this before, the sensory details, the metaphors, the leaps, the analogies, the comparisons that you're making help your readers not only understand what you're trying to communicate, but it gives us a sense of personality. When you read a poem, it's our nature to kind of think about, well, who is telling me this? And how you choose to put a poem on the page will create a persona. And a persona is like a character or a mask. So even though I might be writing about my life, when I'm writing about it in poetry on the page, I'm creating the character of Liz Whiteacre and what she remembers and kind of curating that experience for my readers, versus maybe just having a camera follow me around. I don't know that we want that, but and just observing everything that unedited, uncut. All of us have, I'm calling it a personal lexicon, right? That's like your own personal dictionary. And that is made up from all your lived experience, your education, the cultures that you're a part of, your geographical regions, also what you read. Maybe you've never been to a particular place before, but you've read a lot about it or consumed a lot of media, songs, music, and you know that language and you're a part of it and can use it comfortably. So you are a walking, living dictionary. And all of the words that you have in your head are unique, and you're pulling from those every time you sit down to write, every time you sit down to chat with somebody who you've never met before, right? You are sharing a part of who you are with them through the ways you choose to communicate. And it's really special when you think about it. I have a picture of my personal lexicon, a map that I made of some, this is not extensive, some of the influences I've had in my life that make me talk the way I talk and make me have particular words I tend to grab quickly when I'm doing a very quick writing prompt or draft that maybe later I might go back and revise and use other words or other ways of saying things. So if you take a moment to look at the screen, you do not need to color code yours at all. I was doing that for the purpose of the video, so you could kind of see some different categories. But I married a Texan, right? And I've spent 20 years engaging with that culture down in Arlington, and visiting Texas and learning those traditions and the people who live there and enjoying that through the perspective of my family. And that has affected me. I've been privileged to do travel through school and visit different countries, and also go to different states in America for conferences and stuff. And so I've been able to experience different cultures that way. I grew up, my formative years were in the 1990s when I was learning all the slang in Detroit, Michigan, just north in the suburbs. And so that really affected how I spoke as a teenager. And moving to Bloomington, Indiana, then in my college years, that changed and introduced a lot of words and ideas to me. And then when I went to Southern Illinois, not gonna lie, that's when I started using y'all, which is very handy for the plural you. Um, and so that also made a big difference. I've worked up by Chicago, lots of cultures and lots of new experiences up there. I've been parts of different churches. I'm Gen X, middle class. So you kind of see, I spent, my elementary years in Ohio, just outside of Cleveland. If you kind of look at the pink there, I was thinking about some of the different special language that I've learned. I was a criminal justice major, and so I learned a lot of technical terms about criminal justice, which is nice because I've gone on as a poet to engage with criminal justice workers and write poetry with them and try to build resilience. So I was able to do that because of my comfort level in that particular field. All the words I know, like lexicon and syntax, from being an English major and a creative writer, uh, thinking about what I know from music, since that's something I really enjoy. Film. I've done persona projects and have done research and learned how to talk in the voices of other people. Just reading poetry, practicing so much standard edited English in school. Goodness, folks. I have been working on trying to improve my understanding of the French language. And so now sometimes I'll be places and be like, oh, I think that's a French word. You'll see in green there, I kind of group stuff that I've learned through my interests in nature. Volunteering at India Humane, I have learned a lot of words about animal care and advocacy, raising cats and fish and hens and ducks and geese, and investigating all different types of plants in the garden and till and no-till. So all of those different words are in my head and those concepts. And then I also pulled in just a few there in orange. Um, I've been a mom and a parent and all the parent groups and navigating school and all of those different terms and supporting orchestra and tennis and swimming. I now know a lot of language surrounding swim meets, which I didn't know growing up for myself, but I learned supporting my daughter. I have navigated a lot of healthcare since my first spinal injury in 2000 and deal with chronic pain. So I've learned so much about the body and insurance and all of those things. Uh, I learned how to play guitar and ukulele, right? And frets and all of that. So I went on because I'm hoping and kind of sharing all of these examples with you. You've started kind of thinking about, oh, yeah, for me, it's this or that. What I'd like you to do is get out a piece of paper and a utensil. And we're going to take 2 minutes, and I'd like you to make a map of all of the influences, all of the things that you can think of off the top of your head that affect the words, the phrases, the things, the perspectives that you bring to the page when you write a poem, when you bring into the world, when you start a conversation sitting next to somebody on a bus somewhere. So go wild, fill up the page. Don't worry about color coding like me. That was for the purpose of the video. But think about all of the places you've been, the people who've been around you, the books you've read, the musicians you've fallen in love with. How does that influence what you know in your personal lexicon? Are you ready? Let's do it. Start to write. Keep going. Push, push, push. What groups were you part of? What have you been reading in college? What are your classes you took for gen ed? Part-time jobs, hobbies, all that stuff should go on the page. All right. Write down those last two things you were thinking of. Whew. Shake it out. Deep breath, roll your shoulders, and we're going to move on. There are lots of different ways you can develop your voice in poetry. So you have your starting point, right? And just think about the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 60, 100 years that you might be on this earth. That's a whole lot of living and learning and experience. So that is a beautiful thing, right? They take away the tooth fairy from us when we're little, if you've been a part of that culture, and it's pretty disappointing. But we can still grow and change our language and the way we engage with other people, and that's pretty magical as well. So as you're moving through this course, I hope that you think mindfully and start to pay attention the different things you're doing and the different ways you're practicing and how that influences the way you write between now. We'll have a chance to reflect at the end of the term. But just engaging, showing up, being present, right? Rather than whenever we have a little bit of downtime, talking to people. Even though it's a pain to get over to Fountain Square, go check out that coffee shop or go check out Vinyl Cat and flip through the records and, hang out with a friend. Talking to people can teach us so much and introduce new things. Going to different places, taking advantage of opportunities, right? Taking that class because it sounds interesting. Showing up, being engaged, all of those things put stuff in our brain that then we can access as poets. And it can also give us a lot of things to write about, right? You can also develop your voice in poetry by reading. And not necessarily just other poetry. That certainly helps, but reading a news article every week, right? Reading your chemistry textbook, reading literary analysis, reading The Atlantic, reading pamphlets, goodness, checking out posters. All of those different things can introduce us to language and ways of thinking that can affect our poetry. And also the things you choose to put your time in and study, whether it is getting all the way through Baldur's Gate, right? Or if it is learning a new instrument, or maybe it's making a commitment to figuring something out. You need to figure out how to change your windshield wipers so that you can save some money and be a little bit more self-sufficient. My husband's starting sourdough and returning to that after some years and figuring it out. Um, I'm always trying to figure out how to keep weeds from the garden without using poison. So take some time to learn documentaries, YouTube, TikTok, just explore, learn new things, and be intentional. Pay attention as you are looking at things, being curious about things, pausing to consider, why did I use that word in this poem and not these four other words that I could have used? And just kind of thinking about the choices you're making, maybe not on the first draft, but maybe on the second or third draft, or when you're looking at other poets' work, that can also really help you develop your poetry and start making intentional choices rather than just necessarily the first thought that comes to mind. I'm going to tell you two stories of this in action because sometimes when you get your first poem draft on the page, it can be a beautiful thing. You're just like, oh, celestial light, and it's done. Right? You share it with people, and they're like, oh, this is what I get from this poem. And you were like, that's exactly what I was going for. It happens, and it's pretty special when it happens. Other times, you write a draft and you think, all right, that's a good start. But you're not satisfied, right? You're like, I don't know if that's saying what I don't even know what I want to say, right? So you want to work on it some more, or maybe you share it with people in a workshop, or you share it with a friend, and they have some questions about it, or they're like, yeah, and it's not exactly the response you were hoping for. We start to take a look, and one of the things we start to take a look at is, what are our words? What are our intended meanings? There is the denotation of a word or the agreed upon definition that goes into the dictionary that everybody says, yes, that's what that means. But we also have connotations, and those would be meanings that we associate with the word in different circumstances when they're said by different things. For example, if I say something is cool, right? It's cool. It's groovy. It's hot. But so depending on what generation you're in, if you're using a slang word to say, I think that thing is particularly interesting and pleasurable, right? People use different words, and I'm not even going to try the Gen Z. My daughter has warned me. So you think about all of the different slang words you know for different things. So your intended meaning plus the audience's understanding or interpretation is going to help you find effective choices. There is a picture of a book I wrote that came out in 2025 called It Could Account for the Panic. And it is a collection of poems that I created working with a composer, Meadow Bridgham. Meadow, they have kind of been going through some years with experiencing the diagnosis of temporal lobe epilepsy. So the poems I wrote were taking on the character or persona of someone else. So I had the challenge of doing a bunch of interviews and kind of taking an, different experiences and then coming up with a character to represent that and write it not just in my own voice. Well, we created 6 poems that became songs. Meadow turned them into songs, and they were going to perform them at Yale University. They were working with a singer, Adam Durham, who would perform the song. And I got an email like 2 days before the big performance telling me we have to change a word in one of the poems. The line was, I smell peonies in the hall. Well, every time the singer started singing it, it sounded like I smell pee because it was extended. And they said that will not do. Didn't have a lot of time, so we shifted it to zinnias, which in real life don't really have a strong smell at all, like peonies do. But I smell zinnias took away that problem of I smell pee and in the hall. So sometimes you have an intended meaning, but the way the audience is going to hear that information, you might need to make a different choice and kind of come to a compromise. So I always found that kind of funny. And then I'd like you to look at the picture right next, uh, the picture of the toilet. What do you call that at home? Yeah. So when I was growing up, my grandma always called it a commode. So I don't know if you use that word or not. For me, it stemmed from Northern Indiana, and I would spend summers. And so I often would slip and call it a commode rather than a toilet. And it was in one of the poems that's coming out in Hindsight 2040, the book coming out in 2026. It's a poem I wrote in my 20s. Um, and there's another poem where I use the word John, right? Because the John, that's a word my dad always used. These days, I just say toilet because it's efficient and effective. Um, I have found, I've come to learn that a lot of people don't know commode. They don't say that word anymore. Or if you just say, hey, I'm going to the John, right? That's not a saying that a lot of people use anymore. So I have to make choices. If I say commode in a poem and my audience doesn't know what that is it something I'm okay with them looking up or maybe not looking up and being a little confused? Do I have enough context around that? Because if I say commode, it might make you think of your grandma, right? Or your great grandma. Certainly a particular culture, a particular era in the country, regional location, etc. If I say, going to the John, am I willing to have a little bit of confusion there if that gives you a sense again of who says that? When have they said that in the past? What does that mean? How does that build that character versus using the word toilet? So you have all of these choices as a writer, as a poet. And in the first draft, you might just pick one word, but you do have an opportunity through revision to kind of intentionally craft that and decide, well, if I pick ginormous, what am I saying about my character in my poem versus huge or big? When you are thinking about ambiguity or being very abstract, you have an opportunity to let your readers fill it in with their imaginations. And sometimes that can be really, really satisfying, right? We've all read poems, maybe especially about love, where it's ambiguous enough that you could put your heart's desire or an ex or somebody into that poem really easily and find a strong personal connection to it. Other times, the more specific we are, our readers have an easier time connecting to it, especially when it's something that they don't have a personal experience with, right? If I've never dated anybody before, having some specific things there that I could leap into and tap into might give me a better understanding than just letting me use my imagination. So one's not better than the other. You just want to be thinking about those choices. For example, if I just say the city, right here, I've pulled out two stock images, somebody might pop into their head, right? A big urban city, a big area anywhere in the world. Does that serve the location or the setting in the poem that I'm talking about? Because somebody else, when you say the city, might think of something more rural if that's where they've grown up. And right, that's, oh, the city. Well, Decatur pops into my head versus Indianapolis. So being more specific can help kind of guide the reader so that way what's in their head is aligned with what you're imagining in the poem. Sometimes it doesn't matter, but sometimes being more specific can be really satisfying. How do we figure all of this stuff out? Practice, exploration, giving us permission to try things out on the page we've never tried before, or making multiple drafts that might have different options on them. And then a great way of doing it, and something that's really special for taking a workshop course like this, is turning to readers to see what their responses are. Again, when you share a poem, what's that response? What pops up in people's head? What emotions do they feel as they're reading the poem? And in finding that out, that helps you go through. So our practice of annotation this term is going to help us kind of zoom in to be able to figure out what are the elements of this poem and how are all they working together to create this meaning. Sometimes it'll be really effective, and other times we'll be able to spot, well, nobody knew what that meant. So that kind of spun people off in a bunch of different places, maybe being more specific or doing a different choice or kind of defining it within the poem, then everybody's going to get on the same page. So I have a suggestion after the video for something fun that you can do. This is really interesting if you have a little time to wait. I'll do this sometimes, yeah, like getting an oil change or waiting for a meeting, waiting on a family member to do something they need to do. But if you visit the Dictionary of Obscure Shadow Sorrows, and I'll also put that in the link so that you can click and get there. It's just www.dictionary, thedictionaryofobscuresorrows.com. This is a dictionary that Lox mentions in her book, Finger Exercises for Poets. This has been a really fun project that has been around for a long time. And as somebody who's been interested in it, it's been really fun to watch it develop it over the years. John Coing talks about its origin, and I hope that you'll check out the About page. But essentially, it is exploring how can we name and define things that are really abstract and help us kind of catalog and voice them. So, my challenge to you is to kind of go through the website. There's a lot of free content and pick a word that resonates with you. And then try to take that word and its meaning, and you can even take the word as the title of your poem, and define what that is using concrete things from your life and your lived experience. It might be writing us a scene. It might be creating a list of different things that you would leap to. It might be just rewriting it in your own unique special language. But I hope you might give that a try, especially if when you're doing one of your poetry journals, you're not really feeling very motivated for one of your choice poems. It might be a fun exercise that introduces you to new words, new concepts, and inspires you to connect something abstract to your lived experience and explain it to somebody else. I can't wait to talk more with you next week. And I hope that you just dive in the deep end and really think about developing your voice this term. Thanks.